The battlefield was no place for mercy. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burnt metal. Broken ships lay scattered across the black soil, and the cries of the wounded echoed under a blood-red sky. The war between humans and the Zorian race had left nothing but ashes. Sergeant Elias Thorne moved slowly through the wreckage, rifle ready, eyes sharp. He was tired, bone-tired. His squad had already been ordered to fall back, but he stayed behind to check for survivors. Something inside him couldn't leave the field just yet. He walked past the twisted remains of an armored vehicle when he heard it, a faint, trembling sound. Not a human cry, something smaller, weaker. It came from under a fallen metal sheet near the ruins of a Zorian bunker. Elias froze. It could have been a trap. The Zorians sometimes left wounded soldiers as bait, but this sound didn't feel like that. It was soft, frightened, like a child crying. He knelt, pressed his ear closer. There it was again, a whimper followed by shallow breathing. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon, then slowly lifted the heavy panel. Underneath, covered in ash and blood, was a small creature, a young Zorian girl, no older than 10 by human standards. Her body was thin, her silver fur stained dark with soot. Her glowing blue eyes darted toward him in fear. The moment their eyes met, she hissed a sharp, desperate sound and bared her fangs. Her claws trembled as she raised them in defense. Elias didn't move. He didn't point his gun. He just crouched lower, making himself small, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The little alien stared, confused by his tone. She didn't understand the words, but something in his voice made her pause. Elias slowly removed his helmet. His face was dirty. A fresh scar cut across his cheek, but his eyes were gentle. From a pouch on his belt, he pulled out a small bottle of water. He opened it, took one sip to show it was safe, then extended it toward her. For a moment, the girl just stared. Her claws twitched. Her lips quivered. Then slowly, she reached out with shaky hands and took the bottle. She sniffed it first, then drank. Elias let out a quiet breath of relief. "Good," he said softly. "You're safe now." Of course, she didn't understand, but she could feel it, the warmth behind those strange human words. He looked around. The battlefield was empty now, just smoke and silence. If Command found out he was helping an alien child, he'd be court-martialed. But he couldn't just leave her here to die. He took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The girl flinched at first, then slowly stopped shaking. Her tail moved weakly under the fabric, trying to find comfort in its warmth. "What's your name?" Elias asked. She didn't reply. Just stared at him, her glowing eyes full of confusion and fear. He sighed. "All right then. I'll call you Rava for now. It means hope where I come from." The girl blinked, as if tasting the word in her mind. She whispered. Barely a sound. That single word made Elias smile. He checked the sky. More human dropships were coming. He didn't have much time. Carefully, he lifted the small alien into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. She tried to struggle at first, weakly clawing at his armor, but then she stopped. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she finally trusted him just a little. As he carried her toward the extraction point, Elias looked down at her face. The fur around her eyes was wet. She wasn't crying from pain. She was crying because she didn't understand why an enemy was saving her. When they reached the shuttle, one of his squad mates saw him and froze. "Sergeant, what the hell is that?" Elias gave a sharp look. "She's a survivor. That's all you need to know." They didn't argue. No one dared when Elias used that tone. Inside the transport, the girl sat quietly beside him, wrapped in his jacket. She stared out the window as the battlefield grew smaller beneath them. Elias rested his rifle across his knees and glanced at her again. For the first time since the war began, he felt something strange in his chest. Not anger, not duty. Something softer. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was hope. He reached out and gently patted her head once. Her ears flicked, startled, but she didn't pull away. And though she didn't understand what it meant, that simple touch became the first moment of peace she had ever known. The next morning, the human base buzzed with noise and movement. Dropships landed, bringing wounded soldiers and damaged equipment. Among them walked Sergeant Elias Thorne, his uniform torn, his boots heavy with dust. But what made everyone stare was the small figure walking behind him. A thin, silver-furred alien girl wrapped in his army jacket. Every step she took was hesitant. Every sound around her made her flinch, but she followed Elias closely, her glowing blue eyes never leaving him. "Sergeant Thorne," a medic called out, rushing to his side. "You're supposed to report to the field infirmary. You're injured." "I'm fine," Elias said. "Check on her instead." The medic blinked, confused. "Sir, that's Azorian," Elias nodded. "She's a child. Treat her wounds." The medic hesitated. Around them, soldiers whispered. Some pointed. Some laughed quietly. Others looked disgusted. "Why's the sergeant bringing one of them here?" Someone muttered. Elias turned sharply, his voice firm and cold. "Because she's alive. And that's reason enough." The room went silent after that. The medics worked on the girl carefully, cleaning the burns and bandaging her arm. She hissed at them at first, but when Elias held her hand, she calmed. She didn't understand their words, but she understood his presence. Later, Elias went to his commander's office. The air inside was tense. "You brought an enemy into our base?" the commander said, slamming a folder on the desk. "That's against every regulation, Thorne." Elias didn't argue. "She's not a soldier. She's a child. If we're fighting to protect the innocent, that includes her." The commander sighed. "You always were stubborn." He rubbed his temples. "Fine, but she stays under your responsibility. If anything happens, it's on you." Elias nodded once. "Understood." When he returned to the small quarters, Rava, he had started calling her that, was sitting on the floor, staring at his bunk. Her tail twitched nervously when she saw him. He knelt beside her and smiled faintly. "Hey, Rava," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" She tilted her head, not understanding. But when he held out a small piece of bread, she took it, carefully, slowly. She sniffed it, then nibbled. Her eyes widened. It was the first human food she had ever tasted. She glanced up at him as if asking permission for another bite. Elias chuckled. "Go ahead." As days passed, a strange rhythm formed between them. Rava followed Elias everywhere, to the hangar, the mess hall, even to the training yard. She rarely spoke, mostly watching quietly. Her glowing eyes studied everything, like she was trying to understand this human world. The soldiers joked about it. "The sergeant's got a pet now," one said with a laugh. But when Rava heard the laughter, her fur bristled. She let out a low growl that made the soldier freeze. Her fangs glimmered under the light. "Whoa. Easy there, little beast," he said, stepping back. Elias placed a hand gently on her head. "It's all right, Rava. They're not enemies." The moment his hand touched her fur, she stopped growling. Her tail lowered and she leaned her head into his palm. That tiny act made the other soldiers go quiet. They didn't laugh anymore. That night, Elias found her curled up beside his bunk, sleeping with her tail wrapped around herself like a small silver blanket. He sighed and sat down beside her. For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to move her. She looked too fragile, too peaceful. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, the one he hadn't seen in 3 years. Rava was about the same age. Maybe that's why he couldn't turn her away. Maybe that's why his heart ached whenever he looked at her scared little eyes. When she stirred and opened her eyes, he smiled gently. "Go back to sleep, kid," he whispered. She blinked sleepily, then reached up, her tiny clawed hand resting on his wrist. A soft sound left her throat, almost like a purr. In that quiet moment, Elias realized something simple but powerful. She didn't see him as a soldier or an enemy anymore. She saw him as safe. And for a child born into war, that meant everything. The days turned into weeks. Rava began learning a few human words: water, food, sleep. Her favorite word was safe. She repeated it whenever Elias came into the room. One evening, while they watched the sunset beyond the base walls, Elias gently patted her head again. "You're doing good, Rava," he said softly. Her ears flicked and she gave a small smile. Awkward, but real. Then she pointed at him and said, "Safe." Elias felt something twist in his chest. Maybe hope. Maybe guilt. Maybe both. From that day on, everyone in the base knew. The little alien wasn't just the sergeant's rescue anymore. She was his shadow. His strange, loyal, silver-furred shadow who would follow him anywhere. And deep in her heart, Rava had made a silent promise. Never again would anyone hurt the human who made her feel safe. Weeks turned into months, and the human base changed in small ways. What used to be full of tension and noise now carried strange new energy. because of the little silver-furred alien who followed. Sergeant Elias Thorne everywhere. Her name was known to everyone now. Rava. At first, the soldiers avoided her. Some still whispered when she walked by. Some stared at her glowing blue eyes and muttered, "Beast." But over time, they noticed something unusual. She never attacked unless someone raised their voice at Elias. She never growled unless someone touched his things. And whenever he entered a room, she brightened up like a spark in the dark. To her, Elias wasn't just a soldier. He was her person. Elias noticed the change, too. The shy, trembling child who once hid behind him was gone. Rava now stood straight, her tail no longer tucked close to her legs. She began helping around the base, carrying small boxes, cleaning weapons, or fetching tools. The soldiers started calling her Little Soldier. Some even tried to teach her a few English words. She was clever. She learned faster than most expected. But there was one thing that never changed. She trusted only Elias. Once, during lunch, a young recruit tried to offer her food. "Here you go, little one," he said kindly, handing her a ration pack. Rava blinked, sniffed it, but before she could take it, Elias called out from across the room, "Rava, come here." She immediately turned away from the recruit and hurried to Elias's side. Tail swishing happily, the recruit chuckled. "Man, she only listens to you, Sergeant." Elias smiled faintly. "Guess she's got her favorites." But deep inside, he knew it was more than that. She wasn't just following orders. She was bonded, loyal in a way that went beyond words or species. One afternoon, a few soldiers were training outside the base. Elias was checking their rifles while Rava sat nearby, tail curled around her feet. Two soldiers began arguing. Loud voices, harsh tones. One of them accidentally shoved Elias while turning around. Before anyone could react, Rava leapt forward. Her fur bristled, fangs bared, a deep growl rumbling from her throat. She stood between Elias and the man, claws out, ready to fight. Everyone froze. "Whoa! Hey!" the soldier stammered, raising his hands. "Easy, kid." "I didn't mean anything." Elias quickly moved forward and crouched beside her. "Rava, stop," he said firmly. "He's not an enemy." Her breathing was heavy, but when she looked into his calm eyes, her anger melted away. She lowered her claws and backed off slowly. The soldier exhaled hard. "Damn, she's protective, huh?" Elias just smiled and patted her head gently. "She's got a strong heart." Rava leaned into his hand again, eyes closing slightly as if she found peace in that simple touch. That night, word spread across the camp. The alien girl had bared her fangs at a human, but not out of hate, out of love. As days passed, her protective instincts grew stronger. If anyone shouted near Elias, Rava's ears would twitch. If someone walked too close, she'd step in between. And if anyone made fun of him, even jokingly, her eyes would glow brighter with warning. It wasn't long before even the toughest soldiers started being careful around the sergeant. Some joked that Elias didn't need guards. He already had one. But for Elias, it was never about protection. He saw something else in Rava's eyes, fear of losing him. The same fear she must have felt when she lost her own people. One evening, as they sat outside the base watching the sunset, Elias noticed her quiet mood. "You okay, kid?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. She just looked up at him and asked in her small, broken English, "You leave?" He frowned slightly. "No, Rava, I'm not leaving." She stared for a long moment as if trying to believe him. Then she said softly, "If you go, I fight." Elias's heart tightened. He placed his hand on her head again, gently brushing her fur. "You don't need to fight anymore," he said. "You've already done enough." But Rava shook her head stubbornly. "I fight," she whispered again. "I protect." Elias didn't argue. He just looked at her. This strange, fierce little being who once trembled in fear, now strong enough to challenge anyone for his sake. And for the first time since the war began, he smiled, and not the tired smile of a soldier, but the warm smile of a man who realized that kindness could build something stronger than any weapon. From that day on, whenever anyone came too close, Rava's tail would rise and her eyes would glow softly. No one dared to mock her anymore, because they all understood. The alien girl who once hid in fear now bared her fangs only for one reason: to protect the human who had once reached out his hand and made her feel safe. The night was quiet, too quiet. The human base sat beneath a cold moon, surrounded by rocky hills and the whispers of wind. Most soldiers were asleep, tired from endless patrols. The war had slowed down, but peace still felt like a dream far away. Elias sat by the campfire outside his quarters, cleaning his rifle. Beside him sat Rava, tail flicking lazily, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She liked sitting near him when the night was calm. Sometimes she would hum softly, strange little sounds from her language, peaceful and sweet. Elias glanced at her. "You getting sleepy?" She shook her head, smiling slightly. "Not sleepy, watch," he chuckled. "Always watching, huh?" Rava nodded proudly. "Watch. Safe." Elias sighed but smiled anyway. "You don't have to protect me all the time, kid." But she didn't answer. Her eyes were scanning the horizon, her instincts sharp as ever. Around midnight, the ground trembled slightly, too light to wake most soldiers, but not Rava. Her ears twitched and she stood up suddenly. Fur rising, Elias noticed at once. "What is it?" She sniffed the air, her blue eyes narrowing. "Smell bad." Before Elias could react, a siren blared across the base. The alarm lights flashed red. Voices shouted from the watchtowers, "Contact! Unknown forces approaching from the east." Elias jumped to his feet, grabbing his weapon. "Rava, stay behind me." But Rava was already ahead, crouched low, tail bristling, fangs bared. Moments later, explosions tore through the outer walls. Dust and fire filled the air. From the smoke, figures emerged. Tall, armored Zorian raiders. Rava's own kind, Elias cursed under his breath. Of course it had to be tonight. The raiders opened fire, plasma bolts ripping through tents and vehicles. Soldiers scrambled for cover, returning fire desperately. The night turned into chaos. Elias led a small group toward the communication tower, shouting orders. "Hold the line. Protect the command center." Rava stayed close behind him, eyes glowing bright like twin stars. When a Zorian sniper aimed at Elias from the shadows, she saw it before he did. With a sharp cry, she lunged in a blur of silver fur and fury. Her claws slashed, her fangs sank into the enemy's arm. The alien roared in pain, swinging its weapon wildly, but Rava didn't let go. Elias turned and saw her, the tiny creature he once rescued, fighting like a wild storm. "Rava!" he shouted, firing at the attacker. The plasma blast hit true and the enemy fell. Rava stumbled back, panting, her fur scorched on one side. But she didn't stop. She turned to Elias and growled softly, "No hurt you." He felt something burn in his chest, not fear, but pride and worry all at once. "You saved my life," he said, voice shaking. "You crazy little thing." The battle raged on. The raiders pushed harder, but the humans fought back with everything they had. Rava moved through the chaos like a shadow, striking fast and fierce. Her small size made her hard to hit. Her claws found weak spots in enemy armor. She didn't fight for glory, she fought for him. Then came the explosion. A grenade landed near the barricade where Elias was standing. He didn't see it in time, but Rava did. Without a second thought, she threw herself toward him, tackling him to the ground. The blast went off, a flash of fire and smoke. The shockwave threw debris everywhere. When the dust settled, Elias coughed and pushed himself up. His ears rang. His armor was cracked. But he was alive. Then he saw her. Rava lay beside him, her body trembling, a deep burn across her side. Her silver fur was blackened. "No, no, no," Elias shouted, pulling her into his arms. "Stay with me, kid. You hear me?" She opened her eyes weakly, her blue glow dimming. Her voice was soft, trembling.
"Elias, safe?"
He swallowed hard, tears burning his eyes. "Yeah, I'm safe. Because of you." She smiled faintly, her sharp teeth showing just a little. "Good." Then her eyes closed and her breathing slowed. "Medic," Elias screamed. "Someone get a medic here now." Soldiers rushed to help, dragging stretchers through the smoke. Elias refused to let go of her hand. "She's not dying," he muttered, voice breaking. "You hear me, Rava? You're not dying." The medic arrived, shouting for plasma gel and bandages. They lifted her carefully, her small frame limp but still breathing. As they carried her to the infirmary, Elias walked beside them, gripping her hand tightly. In that moment, it didn't matter that she was alien. It didn't matter that they were supposed to be enemies. She had saved him, not out of duty, but out of love. And Elias made himself a silent promise. If she lived, he would never let her feel alone again. The battle was over. Smoke still drifted across the broken base. The wounded lay in rows, wrapped in blankets, whispering in pain. Some didn't whisper at all. But in the quiet corner of the field hospital, Sergeant Elias Thorne sat beside one small bed, the one that mattered most to him. On the bed lay Rava. Her silver fur burned in places, her breathing shallow. Tubes and sensors ran from her small body to the machines beside her. Every soft beep of the monitor sounded like hope struggling to live. Elias hadn't left her side for 2 days. His eyes were red, his uniform dirty with dried blood, but he didn't care. Every time someone told him to rest, he just shook his head. "She saved me," he said once, voice low and tired. "I'm not leaving her." The medics didn't argue anymore. They knew his heart wouldn't listen to reason. When Rava finally opened her eyes on the 3rd morning, the first thing she saw was Elias's face, pale, unshaven but smiling softly. "Hey, kid," he whispered. "You scared the hell out of me." Rava blinked slowly. Her voice came out weak, broken. "You safe?" Elias let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I'm safe. Thanks to you." She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Good. I protect." He brushed his hand gently through her fur. "Yeah, you did. You protected me better than anyone else ever could." Her small hand, clawed and shaking, reached up and touched his arm. "No die?" she asked quietly. "Not today," he said softly. "Not while you're watching me." She closed her eyes again, this time peacefully, drifting back to sleep. Days passed. Rava's wounds began to heal. Her fur started to shine again, and her eyes regained their soft blue glow. But she was quieter now, calmer, slower to smile. Something deep inside her had changed. One evening, Elias brought her a small wooden box. Inside it was a necklace, a tiny tag with her name engraved in human letters. Rava. He handed it to her gently. "You're part of us now. A soldier's got to have a tag." She stared at it, her eyes wide. Then she touched the small metal piece as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Rava," she repeated softly. "Me," Elias nodded. "That's right, you." She smiled, a soft, shy smile that made his tired heart feel warm again. The other soldiers began to visit her too. The same people who once feared or mocked her now brought food, stories, and small gifts. "Hey, little hero," one of them said one afternoon, placing a ration bar beside her. "You saved the sergeant. Guess we owe you our lives too." Rava looked at him curiously, unsure how to respond. She glanced at Elias, who smiled. "He's saying thank you," he explained. She nodded seriously. "Welcome," the soldier laughed. "Cute kid." Elias chuckled softly but didn't say anything. He was just happy to see her surrounded by people who no longer saw her as a monster. One night, when the ward was quiet and the lights dim, Rava spoke again. Her voice was small, but it carried something deeper than words. "Elias," she whispered. He looked up from his chair. "Yeah, kid? You care?" she said slowly, her human words careful and warm. He smiled faintly. "Of course I care. Why?" she asked, blinking with those glowing blue eyes. He thought for a moment, then answered softly. "Because someone had to show you that not everyone wants to hurt you. Because kindness shouldn't have sides." She tilted her head slightly. "Sides?" "Human, Zorian," he said. "Doesn't matter. You're just you." Rava was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "You, my side." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He couldn't even speak for a few seconds. He just reached out and gently patted her head, the same way he did the first time they met. "Yeah," he said finally, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your side, kid, always." From that night on, Rava began to walk again. Her steps were slow but steady. The first time she stood without help, Elias felt his chest tighten with pride. The base began to call her Sergeant's Shadow. She followed Elias through every corridor again, but now with a new kind of confidence. When soldiers saluted Elias, some even gave Rava a nod too. She didn't always understand the gesture, but she returned it proudly, her tail swishing behind her. And every time Elias smiled at her, every time his hand gently patted her head, she felt something she had never known before: belonging. In the quiet of her recovery, Rava had learned many human words. But her favorite one was still safe. Because when she said it, looking up at Elias with bright eyes, she didn't just mean that he was safe anymore, she meant they both were, together. Peace came quietly, not with cheers, but with the sound of silence after years of pain. The war between humans and Zorian had finally ended. A treaty was signed. Borders were drawn, prisoners were released, soldiers went home. But for Elias and Rava, peace felt heavier than battle, because peace meant separation. Rava stood outside the command tent, holding her new dog tag tightly in her hand. The little metal piece shone under the gray morning light. On the other side of the camp, Zorian envoys waited, tall figures with dark armor and sharp eyes. They had come to take back all surviving members of their kind. She didn't understand it fully. She only knew that the humans had told her she couldn't stay. They want all Zorian back, one officer had told Elias. Even her. She's technically theirs. Elias had clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. She's not a prisoner, he said in a low voice. She's one of us, the officer looked away. I know, sir. But it's politics. Command says we can't risk another conflict. Elias had no answer to that. Only anger. Only helplessness. Now as Rava stood beside him, she could feel the sadness coming off him like heat. Why sad? She asked softly, tilting her head. He forced a small smile. Because you're leaving, kid. Leaving? She repeated, confused. Go, where? Back to your people. His voice cracked slightly. The Zorian ships. They're here to take you home. Rava frowned deeply. No, my home here. Elias swallowed hard. He wanted to say yes it is, but that would only make it worse. Rava, he said gently. They'll take care of you. You'll be safe. She stared at him with those bright blue eyes and the eyes that had learned to trust, to feel, to love. Safe with you, she whispered. His heart broke right there. He wanted to grab her and run far away where no one could take her. But he was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders, even when it hurt. The time came faster than he wanted. Two Zorian envoys approached, speaking in their rough tongue. Rava stiffened when she saw them. Her ears went flat, her small claws flexing. Elias stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between them. Easy, he said quietly. It's all right, but it wasn't all right. Not for either of them. One of the envoys spoke in broken human words. She must return. War's end. Elias's jaw tightened.
She's a child, he said.
You'll treat her kindly. The envoy nodded stiffly. We honor brave. She fought well. Elias crouched down to Rava's level. His voice trembled, but he smiled anyway. Listen, Rava, you're brave. You're strong. You're going to be okay. She shook her head, tears forming in her glowing eyes. No one go. He placed a hand on her head, patting it softly, the same way he did the first day they met. You have to, kid. Just for now, someday, maybe you'll come back. She leaned into his hand, trembling. You come? His throat tightened. If I can. She clutched his arm suddenly, desperate. Promise? He nodded, forcing a smile even as his eyes filled with tears. Promise. When the time came to leave, Rava walked slowly toward the Zorian ship. Every step was heavy. She kept turning back to look at Elias as if afraid he'd disappear the moment she blinked. And every time she turned, he was still there. Standing straight, hand raised in a silent salute. When she reached the ramp, she suddenly stopped. Then she turned around, ran back through the guards, and threw her small arms around him. Elias froze for a second, then hugged her tightly, his chin resting on her soft fur. Thank you, she whispered. He closed his eyes, trying not to break. No, Rava, thank you. She pulled back, eyes shining with tears. Rava, no forget, he smiled weakly. Good, because I won't forget you either. Then slowly she turned and walked up the ramp again. The metal door hissed shut behind her, and Elias stood alone in the cold air, staring at the empty sky as the Zorian ship lifted away, a small dot vanishing into the clouds. That night, he sat by the campfire staring at the necklace he had made for her dog tag's twin. He wore it around his neck now, a piece of her that stayed. She's out there, he whispered to the quiet dark. She'll be okay. But the fire crackled softly and no voice answered back. Only the wind, only the silence of loss, yet deep inside him, a spark of warmth remained, the memory of a small alien girl who once learned to smile because a human patted her head. And somewhere across the stars, Rava looked out a ship's window, touching her necklace, whispering softly in human words she had learned from him. Safe. Years passed. The war between humans and Zorian became a memory, something whispered in history books and told around campfires. New generations grew up in peace. Soldiers went home, cities were rebuilt, and the scars of the past slowly faded. But for Sergeant Elias Thorne, one scar never healed. He still wore the silver tag around his neck, the one that matched the tag he gave her. Every morning he touched it before putting on his jacket, and every night he looked at the stars before sleeping. Wonder if you're looking back, kid, he used to whisper. Hope you're safe. He had returned to a quiet life, a small farm on the edge of the frontier world. The noise of war replaced by the soft hum of wind turbines and the songs of distant birds. But sometimes in the silence he swore he could still hear her voice. You, my side. One cold evening, when the twin suns were setting, a strange ship appeared in the sky. It wasn't human. Its shape was sharp and dark, the kind only Zorian engineers built. It glided down slowly like a silent shadow, landing just beyond the field near his home. Elias froze on his porch, his heart thundering in his chest. Impossible, he whispered. The ship's ramp opened. From the smoke and light stepped a tall figure, cloaked, graceful, with silver fur that shimmered faintly in the sunset. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind carried dust between them, silent witnesses to the years that had passed. Then softly the figure spoke. Elias. His breath caught in his throat. The voice was older, calmer, but he knew it instantly. Rava, he whispered. She stepped forward, the hood of her cloak falling back. Her face was different, older, sharper, but her eyes were still the same glowing blue. He stared in disbelief. You came back, Rava nodded slowly. Promise, she said simply. That one word broke whatever wall was left in him. He walked forward, his boots crunching over the dirt, until he stood before her. For a second they just looked at each other, human and Zorian, soldier and child no more. Then Rava smiled softly. You old, she teased gently. Elias let out a choked laugh, shaking his head. And you're taller. She tilted her head, that familiar gesture he remembered so well. You still Pat? He blinked, a tear escaping before he could stop it. Always. Slowly he lifted his hand and rested it gently on her head. The silver fur was warm under his palm. For a heartbeat, time turned back. The burnt battlefield, the hospital, the promise. It all came rushing back. Rava closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. Safe, she whispered. They sat on the porch after that as the night came in. Rava told him her story, how she had returned to her people, how they treated her as a hero, how she taught them human words and peace. She had become a voice between two worlds, a bridge where there used to be hate. Many Zorians still fear humans, she said quietly. But they listen when I speak of you. Elias smiled faintly. Guess you were the better teacher after all. She shook her head. You teach me more. You teach. Kindness. He didn't know what to say to that. His eyes softened. You kept your promise. That's more than I ever expected. Rava looked up at the stars, her tail moving slowly behind her. I come back to keep another promise. Elias frowned softly. Another one? She turned to him, smiling. You say we same side. I come to make sure still true, he laughed quietly. Always, kid. That'll never change. Later that night, they stood together under the starlit sky. The world was quiet, only the wind whispering through the fields. Rava took something from around her neck, her old dog tag. The one he had made for her so long ago. The metal was scratched and faded, but the name was still clear. Rava. She pressed it into his hand gently. Yours too, he shook his head. No, that's yours, she smiled softly. We share. He looked at her, at the small alien girl who had once been a frightened prisoner, and was now a proud ambassador of peace. His eyes filled with pride and something deeper. Love, not romantic, but pure and human. You did good, Rava, he said quietly. You changed more than you know. She tilted her head again, that same childlike gesture that never left her. You too. As the dawn began to rise, Rava prepared to leave. Her ship's engines hummed softly in the distance. Before she stepped away, she looked back once more. Elias, she said. Next time I bring more. Others like me, to meet. Friend human? He smiled, his heart warm and full. "I'll be waiting, kid." Rava hesitated, then stepped close and gently pressed her forehead against his chest, a Zorian gesture of deep trust. "Safe," she whispered one last time. And as she walked back to her ship, Elias touched the 2 dog tags now hanging together around his neck. For the first time in years, his heart felt whole again, because across the stars, one act of kindness on a single pat on the head had changed the fate of 2 worlds.